Welcome to Forestry Now, where we explore the forces impacting profitable and sustainable management of commercial forests and natural woodlands. I'm Dermot McNally. In this conversation, I speak with Ray Ó Foghlú. Ray is Development Lead at Hometree, a nature restoration charity with a strong focus on woodlands based in County Clare. We discuss the organisation's role in landscape-level projects such as the Wild Atlantic Rainforest Project and the Iveragh Woodland EIP in Kerry. Ray discusses bureaucratic challenges in the Irish forestry sector and the need for supportive agricultural policies that empower farmers while also facilitating nature restoration. Ray sets out a clear vision of how we can create vibrant rural communities that value both food production and ecosystem services. All links in the show notes below, and forestryNowPodcast@gmail.com if you want to get in touch. Now, here's Ray.
So Hometree is a nature restoration charity, strong focus on native woodlands. It emerged out of an organic farm just behind me in Moy in West Clare. It was set up as a charity on that farm about 10 years ago. A lot of people came to that farm. It was like a community-supported agriculture setup. So a lot of people came to that farm looking to engage with food and nature. And, you know, they'd heard about climate change and heard about biodiversity loss. So Hometree was set up as a vehicle to kind of capture that interest. So people could either donate time or money to creating native woodlands in that farm. I think there was about 60,000 trees planted up there over the years. And in 2021, myself and Matt Smith and Mitch Corbett, I suppose in its own way it outgrew the farm. The farm is still very much working away up the road. We moved down the hill into Ennisdiamond. We bought a 16-acre derelict suckler farm, and we took the charity onto a professional footing. That is to say, we started paying wages, and I suppose we started taking ourselves more seriously. It wasn't just a kind of a weekend gig. At its core, we're interested in nature restoration, but I suppose our approach, and not unique to us, but a strong focus of ours is people and community. We really just believe in an Irish context, when you've got farms, you know, tiny farms, you know, like a patchwork quilt all over the country. I think we have 135,000 farms, average size, 30 hectares. If you're not actually dealing with people, and if you don't have the trust and strong relationships with people, you're not actually going to achieve your goals, whether they're agricultural production, productive forestry, native restoration. If you don't get buy-in from people, I think we've all come from rural backgrounds and from farm backgrounds as well. So it was fairly self-evident to us that this is the way to go. You know, you deal with the people first and then try and achieve your objectives next. In terms of activities, I think you could probably accuse us of being too broad. We have an ecology team, finance team, community team, a woodland team, and we've our own tree nursery on site. So we do offer, you know, those as services, and sometimes in other situations we offer them just for free if the outcomes align with our kind of strategic objectives at the charity, which are generally I suppose we have three pillars. One is kind of boring stuff, just about how the organisation works. Is it a good vehicle to deliver what we're trying to deliver? So we call it operational excellence. So that's kind of just background systems and stuff. But the kind of more outward-facing elements of what we're trying to do are nature-connected communities and restoring nature. So one piece being connecting people with nature, and the second, the actual physical implementation of nature restoration. So targets of around 57,500 acres we want to bring into restoration in the next 10 years. That's the goal we've set ourselves. It's ambitious. It's probably about 0.5% of all of Ireland, which makes it sound a bit less ambitious, but that's what we're trying to achieve. And, you know, we're taking our job seriously. You can make lots of nice videos and lovely photos and social media posts when you're working with land and working with trees and working with communities, and we're not here just to look good. We want to actually have real tangible impact over the years.
Yeah, there's scale there, Ray. That's big figures. I mean, if you were hitting those figures you can restore them, but if even a high percentage of each area per year was afforested, it would make a massive difference to the national achievement rate, because we're really struggling to plant trees. And
I'm sure that'll come up as the conversation unfolds, but We will certainly be and have already been involved in using the existing schemes to deliver afforestation as it will be prescribed or viewed in the eyes of the state, through various schemes. Primarily for us, I suppose it's been the Native Woodland Scheme or Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, but we're very much interested in where the opportunities for woodland creation outside schemes lie as well. Now, I don't mean outside regulation. I mean very much like, with proper ecological oversight, but things that maybe the current schemes don't look at. I think it's something maybe we might get on to later about where there is opportunity for woodland creation that's not actually met within the current system.
Okay, well, is it timely then to move on to talk about a practical project that's mentioned on the website, the Wild Atlantic Rainforest Project? Because I presume that's part of the vehicle you hope to drive some of your nature restoration through.
Our first kind of big break, and it was really critical for us, was, when we were saying, can we actually run this as a wage-paying organisation, was we got a small-scale EIP from the Department of Ag. We had a belief, that forestry is obviously was at the time maybe a little less so now, was kind of very much stuck in the mud, delivering a fraction of probably a quarter of its yearly target. We believed that farmers were interested in trees, and we just felt they needed a bit of extra support, that it was a big decision, permanent land use change, stopping in some situations farming a piece of land that had been farmed for generations. So that EIP, we worked with 12 farmers around Milltown, Malby and Clare, and it gave us a sense that we can achieve our goals in terms of not like woodland creation or nature restoration on Hometree land, working with private landowners, greasing the wheels of the system such that just to facilitate them stepping into these decisions with confidence. That really worked. I don't know the amount of acres planted in the end, because there was challenges with the department and permissions and licenses and stuff, which we can certainly chat about. But we submitted licenses of around 100 acres on the couple of farms. So that kind of led us to believe, okay, like this is the West Coast, and not always the easiest place to get permissions for forestry, a combination of designations for nature, SPAs, SACs, but also elevation, exposure, coastal proximity. And we said, okay, maybe we have a route to do this, to create woodlands in the West. And one of the great things about the West is you have these like hyper-oceanic conditions. I think with Clare is around 2,500 mils of rainfall a year, but parts of Kerry and Connemara are like 3,500 mils, compared to Dublin or some of the East Coast might be 700 mils. So very wet climate, and in these wet climates you have these oceanic woodlands. They've become to be known as temperate rainforests. In recent years have been popularized, and we felt it was just a great hook. At the end of the day, we're in the business of kind of inspiring and selling an idea, a concept of what the future might be. And the Wild Atlantic Rainforest Project was kind of an umbrella to put around some of the more tangible technical work we did, like the EIP, but also the community work. So at the time, it was 2022, we set ourselves a goal of 4,000 acres brought into restoration. Now, that's not necessarily schemes. That could be, some of it could be schemes, some of it could be naturally regenerated. Some of it could be peatland restoration. These habitats exist on a mosaic on the landscape. So like we're not absolutely beholden to woodlands. So it's been going well. We decided a half of it we try and do on private land, as in work partnering with farmers, giving them the incentives and the information they need, and half on our own. We're a good way along to the target. We have another 2.5 years to finish it. But certainly we have a good couple of 100 acres, or probably a couple of thousand in the private landowner, maybe about 1,200 in the private landowner, and about 700 acres of our own land done. So we're making progress on that.
Yeah, tell me this, Ray, and those forests you're talking about and those farms, have they been degraded over time? Is there forest remaining? What condition is it in? On top of that, what was the farmer attitude when you approached them to get involved?
I suppose we've been lucky in that we've always kind of approached this with an opt-in approach. Nobody ever has to engage with us. If they do fill out an expression of interest form or, follow up something with us and they're not particularly interested in what they hear, it doesn't suit their situation, that's fine. We're here to give information, and if that aligns with a farmer's current circumstance or situation, great, we'll try and help them. And if it doesn't, so we've been lucky that way. So from that point of view, I suppose we generally get people who are already kind of thinking fairly positively about woodland creation. I suppose what I've found, your full-time farmers, which are rarer and rarer in the West, they're more scrupulous, I suppose, around the details. They want to know exactly the implications of what they're getting into, because they're trying to balance the trade-off of the grass they might lose, the income they might gain, versus a lot of farmers, maybe I see increasingly in the West, maybe they don't have someone to take on the farm, be it there's no kids there or there's just none of the kids are interested. And I suppose they're more looking at, how does this look over the next 20 years? They've worked off farm, they probably had a decent income, they might have a pension, and they're just wondering, like, can the farm sustain itself? What's the blend of forestry and farming I'm wanting to do in the coming years? Everyone in Ireland, everyone who has land in Ireland is a little suspicious about permanent land use change. They're a little suspicious about forestry. I'm looking up at Silvicultural here to my left out the window, and it's blanketed in spruce, and that's the perception of forestry. The perception of forestry, I think, is the biggest barrier. And when you can say, actually, it needn't be commercial, it could be broadleaf, it could be agroforestry, it could be actually the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, where you're actually just protecting the wood that exists. When they learn maybe the flexibility that exists in it, there's much more openness. But then it's a long old road. If you're going through the schemes, you kind of take that initial goodwill, and you say, God, I hope I can hang on to it till we get till the end of the licensing process. We had a desperate time with the EIP, like all of the licenses we submitted got a letter back saying, no broadleaves near the sea, please reapply with GPC3 with Sitka spruce. And that was, there was just a local inspector at the time, that was his view, and that was a disaster. Like, all these people have been brought on this journey, they said, I don't really want the spruce, that's, but I do like broadleaves, and we said we can make that happen. And for them, now we fought all of them, and we sorted most of them out. But for a land use that's already viewed with a bit of, people are a little bit cautious about it, to have that happen, it just kind of maybe adds to the suspicion around it.
That's challenging for you to operate on that. And as I say, when you have to fight the system, it's not good. I mean, I've heard the situation where some inspectors are over rigorous with the application of the rules. Some of them are sympathetic, but yeah, they point back to the rules. So was that a case, Ray, that you had to appeal it to a higher body, or you had to go through the appeals board, or what was the practical way around that?
It wasn't a refusal. It was almost like a communication that approach isn't going to work. We recommend this approach. So it was dealt with at that level. That the inspector actually changed here in Clare around the time. Yeah, we were able to make the case. I mean, we had situations here in my own place. I have a couple of acres here. I'm literally overlooking the sea. It's about 800 meters across the fields here from me. And I just planted a couple of hundred trees when I bought it. I just planted them myself. I was very interested. It was kind of wet ground. It wasn't a bog, but it was wet ground, and it was very exposed and whatever. I said, geez, I'll see how these go. Like, that was 2017, and like, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they climb those trees now. Like, those trees have flown it. They're 12 foot tall. They're flying it, and they really are quite exposed. So I had a strong sense that, like, maybe we're a little bit too conservative. Now, I understand, it's the public purse and all this, that we're a little bit too conservative, particularly when it comes to trees for nature, the Native Woodland Scheme. We're not trying to produce timber here. We're trying to produce trees for nature. So I kind of don't mind if the tree is a bit crooked. You need a forest to grow, for sure. So we were getting refusals in sites, couple of hundred meters up and down the road from this site that I'd seen trees thrive on. And that was frustrating.
Is part of that, Ray, that there's so few forests on that landscape, that there's a perception that if they're not there, they can't grow, whereas the reality is they were removed, or the overgrazing has stopped the forests from continuing to expand or whatever?
I think it's a combination of two things. There's like a production, a silvicultural mindset probably persists at some level in the Forest Service, understandably coming from a silvicultural background. It's about growing trees primarily for timber. Now, look, I totally acknowledge that's shifting and evolving, but that would still be embedded fairly deeply, that we're trying to grow something that grows really vigorously and straight and all that. I think that's one side of it. And that's baked into the rules. I think there's still an obligation that a site should be able to carry yield class 14 timber on it, whether it's for nature or for timber. So that is baked into the rules. I think the second thing is, you look out across this landscape and there are very few trees. the next village down the road from Milltown Malby is called Quilty. You can translate that yourself, Quilty. There were 100% trees all over this landscape, perhaps stunted, perhaps a bit crooked, but they were here. My sense is there's no seed source. The southwest is the prevailing wind here. There's not much of a seed source coming onto this. So really you just get a bit of willow in the hedges and very little else. So it's hard to maybe imagine that trees would do well. But, individual cases down by the Armada Hotel there in Spanish Point, there's a block of forestry. It must have been planted just by a private landowner. They actually did a very clever thing. They planted a ring of protected Sitka spruce. This is it's probably 5 or 6 hectares around a plot of broadleaves. They've all flown it
Okay, to give it windshield, yeah.
They've flown it. And I'd be very interested, our forester at the time, and he's still a great friend of the charity, Manus Crowley, he was saying, look, if we don't get the department over the line, I wonder, could we propose things like that? Maybe a sacrificial windshield of spruce or something like that and put the broadleaves inside it. So that's really, I suppose, an element of nursing, a nursing crop, and so that sounds good. Ray, could you touch on a little bit maybe what a nature conservation or a forest conservation project looks like for someone who has a little bit of forest down in a ravine that's maybe overgrazed and not protected and not replenishing with new stock? So for us, we always say we're kind of trying to build an airplane whilst also trying to fly it. We're learning with every project with the EIP, the Island Farm Forest EIP. We've a new EIP in Kerry now we might chat about later, and smaller projects along the way. We're learning kind of what is the optimum approach here. For me, we've done just straight conservation projects. We financially supported one in the Uplands of South Kerry recently, where this fragment of old oak wood that was just, it's there since the early 1800s, but it was just being overgrazed. The underneath of it was just sheep grazed 365 days a year. So I believe they're called senescent woodlands, where the trees are very much alive, but there's nothing happening in the understory and there's no opportunity for regeneration. So with that, it was just a straight case of fencing off the woodland. But we'd be a lot more ambitious now in terms of the scale. That was 2 hectares is all that was fenced, similar to what you do under the Native Woodland Scheme. How I imagine it now, and what I think is going to play out with the Iveragh Woodlands EIP, it'll be using a combination of funding sources and policy approaches to deliver what the landowner wants. So say they have a patch of old native woodland, maybe the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme can support that. There's an area that's actually suitable for planting according to the Native Woodland Scheme, because that's really useful. The long-term payment is huge for that in terms of from the farmer's point of view. So you might put some into that. And then you might have a section that says above the 120 metre elevation line that the department are concerned about planting over. They go, well, we can't support that. Well, the EIP then has its own funding stream for supporting that. What does woodland creation look like in areas or sites that are outside the current rules of the Forest Service?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So in effect, and we'll actually move on to the Iveragh Woodland EIP then. But yeah, you've got the EIP as an overarching vehicle to get in and engage with landowners, and then you'll have your woodland conservation scheme and your typical LAF for native woodland, and you combine the 3 of them to bring the best results to the farmer.
One other thing will be, we've got some support in Hometree from the Conservation Measures Unit of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. They're very much focused on annex habitats. And, once you can demonstrate that, we have a project here, they can pay sometimes for capital works that help to deliver on their objectives. We'll also be playing with, we have a team at the moment, fantastic team of 3 working on what nature financing might look like out into the future. That's to say, how much, the extent to which existing payments can be directed towards nature restoration, as in the BIS payments. There's a lot of flexibility there. What I said already, the existing forestry payments, is there a role for private finance, for corporate payments, for philanthropic payments? So that's a big project we're working on at the moment. And look, I know many other people, including the state itself, are kind of really trying to examine how are we going to meet this bill coming down the tracks, because as you know, the targets, not just the existing forestry targets, but the incoming targets related to the nature restoration law, they're huge, 10,000 hectares of oak wood alone per decade for the next 3 decades. So that's just one example. So
looking to buy or sell a forest? Or maybe just wondering what broadleaf and conifer forests are making on the open market. If so, then take a look at forestsales.ie, where you'll find forests across the country and all the information you need to make an offer. Now back to the chat with Ray. Let's move to the Iveragh Woodland EIP then. Just give me a quick overview of it, although I suspect many of the same challenges that you've discussed will reappear.
Probably the same challenges here as we have here in Clare, maybe amplified a bit at a more extreme level. So these are like, I suppose, the uplands of South Kerry. It's most of the project will take place within the Reeks SAC. So you've got the compounding factors of high elevations, lots of peaty ground, but also mineral pockets, unenclosed land, generally not looked at by current forestry schemes, heavily designated, annex habitats all over the place. So you have to be very careful, like how and where you might plan woodlands. And so for us, our belief was that native trees have a role in these upland areas. And our belief is that lobbying, and important lobbying by the environmental community to get spruce out of the uplands also took the opportunities for native woodlands out of the uplands. Even where ecologists would say that's a good place for woodlands, it'd be very hard to get permission. So that was our belief, that there's a space for woodlands up here. You got to be careful with how you approach it, but there's a space for it. And so our two core objectives was determining kind of a sound ecological roadmap to creating woodlands in these designated uplands, and improving. The second core pillar was improving farm incomes. These are sheep primarily and suckler farms who really, like, the viability is on a razor's edge at the moment. It's these areas were probably farmed out of hardship going back decades ago or even centuries ago, and the logic or the rationale just doesn't pertain as much anymore to. Sure, maybe the lower, better fields might be farmed, but farming up the top of the mountain, so you're seeing what I'm seeing was a lot of abandonment, but not out of an intention to put land back into nature, out of a sense of failure. So I was like, why can't we put a bit of, if people are going to withdraw from parts of the landscape anyway, and that those parts of the landscape are suitable for woodland, is there not a great overlap here where the state can achieve its objectives around woodland creation or nature restoration, and farmers can actually financially benefit from engaging with it with very little trade-offs? So that was the logic to it. The EIPs are all about proposing solutions to policy gaps. So we proposed it as a solution. I suppose we had a bit of a track record from the Iveragh EIP, which did well, won a couple of awards. Yeah, we got it. 1.7 million for 4 years. It is still a pilot scale. It's 300 hectares. So we've got a fantastic team on it now. Big focus on community. We've got a great forester associated, as well as our internal forestry team, Marina and Brian, and project ecologist, project manager, and I'm the project lead. So yeah, we've opened expressions of interest forms now. Farmers, we have a load of people applying, and we'll select the most suitable 15 or 20. And I think we'll be out on site in the next 3 months, kind of assessing the first sites.
Brilliant. Can I stop you on one aspect which I'm confused on? You mentioned 300 hectares, but then equally you're mentioning expression of interest. So do the people need to be within that 300 hectares?
The catchment will be thousands of hectares, or as in the area we defined as being in the project is the McGillicuddy Reeks SAC plus a 5 kilometre buffer. So there's thousands of hectares in it, but we have the funding to work on 300 hectares. Like, we're really hoping to kind of amplify the effect of the project. We can pay for 300 hectares of woodland creation on the bits that there's nothing else will cover them. So if the current DAFM schemes won't cover them, if the Conservation Measures Unit, the Native Woodland Scheme. So we'd hope that we can actually have a pretty big impact, maybe approaching 1,000 hectares, but we have 300 hectares that we can pay a brand new type of payment for woodland creation where there's no payment existing right now. Okay,
understood. Okay, so again, you're going to combine the different schemes, but the EIP is funding 300. And what does that funding look like? I have, let's say 25 hectares of lowland, marginal land further up the Reeks here. I'm retiring, I'm 62. I still have a couple of sheep here, but it's not working. I'm interested in working with you. How can it work for me then?
So what we do is we'll do a kind of a whole farm assessment and get a good understanding of what the farmer wants. My sense is most, as a fella said on the radio one time last year, they were talking about destocking. Would they be up for destocking? He said, I would be up for destocking, but I'd still want a reason to get my arse out from in front of the fire, and I think that will pertain. I think farmers will still want to farm, but in a way that works for them going forward. So it'll be getting a sense of what they want and what land they're maybe interested in hearing other options for, and then presenting options. That low field could go here, this field could go there. And I suppose the areas of land we'd be interested in are kind of rocky, brackeny, unsuitable for current schemes, not sensitive habitats such as peatlands or heaths. So we'd say that area there, that 40 hectares of steep hillside, we can put that into the scheme. And then what that looks like, into our scheme, what that looks like then is we wanted it to be clearly of financial benefit to the farmer, right? It was a core pillar, is economic benefit to upland farmers. So there's a sign-up fee to make it attractive. It's around 170 a hectare. There's a results-based payment of around 300 a hectare if you get quite a good score, and that'll taper back. That's not necessarily going to be for 2,500 saplings per hectare. That's actually will be scored on, do the conditions exist on that hectare for a woodland to potentially emerge? Is there a seed source? Is there low enough herbivory? Is there invasive species? So it won't be necessarily they get scored on woodland creation. It's like, are the conditions for future woodlands there? And then there'll be a capital budget which will vary depending on where it's needed most, but it'll be a good couple of hundred per hectare to see if there's kind of remediation works required. That might be scarifying the soil. If there's a seed source there, it might be adding, patchy clumps of trees, maybe in tubes if deer are too high. The fencing allocation, there's a big enough fencing allocation for the project over the years, but it's all directed towards sheep fencing. We're not going to attempt to exclude deer at a parcel level. We're going to control them at a landscape level. So we have a full wild herbivore strategy being run concurrently, which will be suppressing deer and goat numbers down to a number that aligns or can accommodate natural regeneration of trees.
And just on that aspect, is that funded again through the EIP?
That's funded through the EIP, yeah. So it's being run by two great lads, Adam Smith and Killian Murphy, who are, real deer experts. So it'll involve understanding what's the deer pressure there now, what's the local hunting effort like, is there capacity in the area? Can it be directed? Can the data be gathered? And they'll monitor using herbivore impact indexes, like assessing the plants on the ground. Say, the plants can kind of tell you a lot. Is there a lot of ivy there? Is there no ivy? That type of thing. And also using camera traps to understand where we're at with the deer. I think there's good research from Scotland that is it 2 deer per square kilometre is the kind of magic figure that allows trees to kind of get away. So,
but the reality is you're facing into every challenge here. You're not blindly ignoring one challenge. It's all, you've thought through it in the plan for the EIP. So you have a holistic approach.
That deer thing was a big one because, the traditional approach will be, look, throw up a deer fence. And I get that. I really get that. If you're just like, we have a job to do, we need to protect the trees, throw up a deer fence. But you've seen it, I'm sure, particularly in areas with existing trees, even a year or two after, like a tree could come down the deer fence and like a lot of time and effort is wasted. And it just doesn't strike me as the solution to landscape scale restoration. We'd like this pilot to kind of indicate this is the likely path forward. And my guess is it's not massive deer fenced exclosures. It's deer management at a landscape level.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. Tell me this, and this is maybe we'll move on to this conversation about the policy environment, because if DAFM and the Forestry Service won't fund some of these pockets of forestry that you're proposing in parts of these uplands, I mean, how can you fund them under an EIP? And are you sticking to the same rules that apply to elsewhere? So how does that work? Because it seems like slight contradiction.
No, so this is the whole idea is EIPs are probably a way of the state like de-risking an approach, new approaches, rather than the state jumping in 2 feet first. It says maybe run an EIP, see what we can learn from that, and we'll carry maybe the best bits forward, the bits that didn't kind of cause any difficulties or were accepted. So we don't have to play by the same rules. I mean, like, of course, like, environmental sensitivities, there's a full-time ecologist, and the MPWS is one of our operational group partners. So this will all be done with high levels of ecological oversight. But some of the rules we don't have to abide by would probably be more coming from the silvicultural side of the house. So say, for example, the elevation, we're not limiting ourselves to 120 meters. We're not beholden to, trees being free of competitive growth by year 4. We're not committing. We don't care if there's more than 25% open stone or boulders on the ground. Doesn't matter to us. These things don't matter. We're talking about woodlands for nature, not for timber. So certainly some of those rules we won't have to abide by. Probably a key one, and we're being completely explicit with it, with the landowners, is this doesn't come with a permanent land use change. It's not. We're not. That's not what it is. This is an agri-environment.
Why is that? Am I not right in saying that anyone who plants trees or has copses or areas of forest, native woodland running down a ravine at the back of the farm, is that not completely protected under legislation?
It would be, but at a certain point, it would start to be protected by the legislation that pertains to felling licenses. Perhaps if we start, this project is 4 years. So we'll be paying farmers to explore opportunities for woodland regeneration. It mightn't even be planted, Dermot. This could be allowing wild woodlands spread themselves for 4 years. That's not going to, so we're being clear with the landowners. If at the end of the 4th year, you decide it's not in your best interest to keep going with this process, that's fine. I think we need to be honest as an EIP. That's all we've got the funding for. After that,
yes.
What I'd like to say to the farmers is, I believe that the nature restoration law or potentially other commitments the state has will mean that there will be an opportunity to continue funding at that point using a different mechanism. But I cannot and won't make that promise now, nor will that farmer be in a situation where the forest has hit the threshold or the criteria where a felling license is relevant. You might be talking at this stage about scattered birch trees, less than the thickness of my thumb across a field, maybe 3, 4, 5 foot tall. That's the stage where you'll be at, which wouldn't have its own level of protection. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because as you said, your project is for 4 years. And as we all know, and especially probably in those environments, your trees aren't going to be huge. And anyway, you're not talking about blanket AFR on 20 flat hectares. You're going to be doing 0.2 of a hectare somewhere and maybe an acre somewhere else. This type of stuff, that's kind of, you're going to see a patchwork or...
No, I would say it'll be bigger. Now, of course, we need to be cognizant of the rules and the laws in the Forest Service. We'll be working very closely with them as well as Teagasc's on the operational group to make sure, if there are plantings specifically going on in these kind of more elevated areas, that they happen in compliance with the rules that exist. So my sense is it will be that they'd have to stay lower than the agroforestry threshold of 400 to the hectare. I think that's what the acres woodland creation plots are. They have to stay below that threshold, that where a license requirement will kick in. So look, this is something all that the first step will be to get the land in. It'll be much bigger plots than half hectare. These will be 20 hectare plots, hopefully bigger. But if there is planting to occur, that'll be sporadic enough that it'll be below any thresholds that'll kind of kick in the requirement to get a license. Now, we also might apply for licenses for trees that we don't expect the state to fund. We say, okay, well, if we go this route, we'll probably need a license. We'll get that license on the understanding that we're not entering a scheme. We're just getting permission to create this woodland. This all comes about at the stage when we have the land parcels in the door. The team with our foresters and our ecologists is going to sit down and say, what are the challenges here? What are the strategies we're going to implement? Where do they interact with current legislation? What are the next steps? Then this is really all about learning as we go, Dermot.
On the learning then, you have existing experience from an EIP. Tell me this, does the knowledge that comes out of the EIPs, because I've read that there's been great EIPs in the Burren and different places, and sometimes it seems as if the great work gets done, but a follow-up EIP isn't funded, and some of the learning doesn't seem to get integrated into policy. Would that be a fair comment, or is that...
Yeah, one of the first engagements actually the EIP team went on was Upland's event up in Letterfrack. And I suppose I've been in the space a couple of years. Some of them were a bit newer to it, and they were like, God, there was a bit of disdain or hesitation or suspicion around EIPs and some of the farmers. And I said, I totally understand that. These are short-term projects. They come, they go. The hope is that, look, they're never about achieving impact at scale. And to be fair to them, they're about, like understanding potential future solutions. But I suppose from the perspective of the local landowners, they came, everything was great, we were doing all this, and then they just disappeared. And I think it can be perceived in the meantime that the state can look great. The state can say, look at these great projects we're doing all over the country with the hen harrier and the curlew and the woodlands in Clare. But when it comes down to the hard end of things and like agri-environmental policy, as you're referencing in the Burren, there was a LIFE project, not totally dissimilar to a EIP, when its learnings were transitioned to the actual acres project. They got very much watered down. They got very much, and there was a lot of unhappiness there. So look, I can understand a little bit of caution around EIPs. And that's one of the reasons I'm saying, Dermot, that we're being explicit. We're paying you for 4 years. We expect you to, if you want to get the full payment in those 4 years, to kind of comply with the advice of the EIP. Outside that, we would neither expect you to keep going with anything that you're not explicitly being paid for.
If you're interested in advertising your organisation to forest owners and forestry professionals, get in touch to find out more. Now, back to the chat with Ray. Ray, this is a great project, and it strikes me that you're setting up the next 20, 100 years in this particular location. But I wonder what farming's going to look like there when these farmers are getting older and, as you say, there isn't succession. What happens?
I think there's a pivot needed where we actually say the uplands aren't unproductive. They're unproductive for food, but they're hugely productive for carbon, or could be hugely productive for water quality. Maybe even they could be hugely productive for timber, hugely productive for biodiversity, hugely productive for amenity. But we've always taken most of those things for granted. So my hope is that we'd actually start paying for them from now on. We say we actually need the good water quality. We need carbon sequestration. So that's one thing. And there's a combination there of like the state, delivering the payments, but also the farm orgs asking for them and imagining what their future could be. Because I think they're kind of walking to the end of a cliff. This idea of like €30 for the ewe, €30 for the ewe, that like, a couple of hundred for the suckler cow. I don't think there's any future in those kind of headage style payments. I'd like to see where it works, sheep and suckler cows stay in the uplands, but it's about using them as an aid to provision of ecosystem services. That's what I really believe the future is there. I think tech has a big role. I was up in the bog there near Roundstone in Connemara yesterday, and I just saw the most gorgeous sight. I looked to the right of me and I saw a herd of 7 Dexter cows, completely unenclosed landscape, rocky, slightly boggy in areas, bits of acid grassland, really diverse grassland. And there they were with the GPS collars on their neck, and they're grazing the areas that needed grazing on the landscape and avoiding the other areas. Tech like that's has a massive role to play in the uplands. Now, for that to work, we need a successful period of succession to occur. We need like the current generation to be able to convince the next generation there's actually a future here for you. There's actually a life worth living on. The income figures in these farms, it's very low, but people farm them out of a love for farming. So there will be a desire to stay farming rather than a desire to this thing needs to wash its own face, but it doesn't need to be hugely profitable.
I struggle to see how it works because I think that we talk of valuing nature, but when it comes to the bit, your project, the side EIP and what you are doing through different funding sources, it's unique.
It's one of the points I wanted to make, we've given farmers no reason yet to believe they have a future in nature restoration, in my opinion. We've designated land and we said, that's really important land, for nature. So we designated, and you can't do this, that or the other on it. They said, great. So there's some kind of a payment maybe down the line, sometimes not. They were really let down there. Then the agri-environmental payments, some of the first reps payments were coming in. I spoke to a lad at the 11,000 total farm payment in around the year 2000. The maximum someone could hope to achieve in regular acres now is 6,000, maybe if they're in CP, and 7, 8, maybe 9 if they're doing exceptionally well. Whilst hearing that like nature and climate is really important, that speaks for itself. So I think, I definitely think a lot about this. Like, if we want actually there to be a future for these farmers, you need to take a cap off what they can earn for the environment. You want it to be possible for a farmer who's farming for nature to be as ambitious as a farmer who's farming producing litres of milk. That if they produce more nature, more curlew nests, more species-rich grasslands, that they can just do really well out of it. I think we probably are slow to acknowledge the about turn that we've actually asked them to make. Like literally thousands of years of a mindset of production. Like, how can I get the most from what I'm doing? That was always the mindset. I can't remember the government minister in the 30s who said, another year, another sow, another acre under the plough. Every year a bit of improvement. And then 15, 20 years ago, no, actually, that's not what we wanted to do. So like you were trying to undo a lot of, deeply embedded kind of cultural norms there of what a farmer is and what they're to do and what a good field even looks like, what a good mountainside looks like. So that was always going to be a challenge there. So I think to overcome that challenge, you really would have needed like a rock solid proposition or proposal for them to step into. And that wasn't there. It was kind of watery and uncertain, and when they did engage, they were let down. And I'll finish on this. But we're seeing 20 years for farmers on the native woodland scheme still being kind of, there's no massive uptake for it, and maybe they're thinking at longer timescales. A friend of mine calls the native woodland scheme shackling oneself to penury. It's a great payment for 20 years, but after 20 years, you've got an oak crop, maybe the thickness of your leg, that's not got any commercial value for another, you'd probably know better than me, 30 years.
It's simply non-commercial. And then, of course, if you are productive minded and you're planting Sitka, you're losing 35% of your productive area. Now, there's part of that is totally correct. But there's also, I wonder at the logic of planting fringe broadleaves just to pretend that we've got a broadleaf element on a productive forest. I mean, is that wise, Ray?
Couldn't agree more. What are these things going to look like in 20 years? These strange, 5-meter lines of trees that are often unsuitable or planted without too much sophistication. It feels tokenistic, that obligation. Is it 15 or 20%?
Yeah, 15, I think.
For me, plant it in blocks. I know Manus has always been big on this. Plant it in blocks in the most suitable parts of the site where it'll emerge as a really healthy native woodland in its own right. Or for me, don't obligate the 20% at a parcel level. Obligate it at a county level or a regional level. Say, look, within that region, we generally want X amount of broadleaf, and then create proper permanent broadleaf forests, and also then create productive forests. I think we should obligate diverse productive species, conifers, because I think if we don't, we're going to pitch landowners back into a ash part 2 again, where they've all their eggs in one species basket and they just lose everything. I do think even if it reduces the profitability a little bit, there should be diversity within the productive species so as people can hedge a little bit and they don't lose everything. I'm not sure your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have this challenge that the devil i.e. Sitka, even though you're taking the risk with the monoculture element, it's easy to grow, it's fast to grow, and it grows great timber that's in demand. So it is a challenge to find replacement species for something that is so good.
Well, absolutely. It's like people talk, I'd be probably considered an environmentalist, and people say, they'd put all kinds of negative connotations on Sitka, toxic Sitka and all this. I'm like, Sitka is popular because it was just such a fantastic tree. It just did the business almost anywhere you put it. As you say, the timber was good. It was in demand. There's nothing wrong with the tree. It's how we've maybe sometimes deployed the tree in inappropriate context.
Maybe we'll finish on that. Just get your thoughts on Clearfell as a model, Ray, because I have aspirations for continuous cover on a site in Monaghan as it happens, but I have other sites, and I know from the landscape that CCF is going to be very challenging. The soil, the elevations, how they were planted. From your point of view as a member of the team there at Hometree, how do you see Clearfell? Is there a place for it in the forestry sector going forward?
Like, the first thing I'd say is this is certainly not my area of expertise. I don't personally mind it. Once it's done sensitively, I know even certain bird species almost need it. Like, well, not need it. It's probably not an optimum situation for hen harriers to be nesting in young spruce, but they do seem to use it if it's available to them. So there is probably a logic and a rationale, and I'm sure, the accountant would tell you it's an efficient way of doing things. I think it's just about mitigating the impact. And I know there was some work done on, I think it was the Pearl Mussel EIP in Kerry, where they've spent a couple of €100 a hectare on additional mitigation measures like silt traps and ponds or terminal, running drains out into settling pits and stuff like that. And they found them to be very effective. It's just, would we implement that? So for me, look, I really see the value of it. I'd imagine there's ways of doing it really well, and maybe that's the direction we need to head.
Yeah, I think you're right. Anything done badly is not right.
Now, I would say this, Dermot, it really saddens me to see, the Sitka being replanted into deep blanket peats, and it's still happening. Quills probably feel they need to fulfill their replanting obligation. That's what the law says. And I know someone who worked on the process of getting the planning permission needed to take inappropriately planted Sitka off some bogs out in the west of Ireland, and it was hugely expensive and hugely bureaucratic to get the permissions needed to just do the right thing. The same, I would say, in things like hen harrier SPAs, the experts know that, we need to bring it below a certain threshold. I cannot understand, given the bird is in such precarious circumstances, why we can't say, cool, what is that number? What will it take to bring the total cover down below that number? And just let's get on with it. There's probably multiple wins there. I can't understand where the resistance is, but look, I don't operate at those levels where the decisions are being made.
No, me neither. Ray, is there anything we didn't touch on there that you wanted or hope to mention today?
I like this idea that the future is rural. There's lots of things that the rural Ireland can provide, both from a cultural point of view, but also food point of view, from a amenity point of view, from a ecosystem services point of view. And, I think we need a kind of a vibrant sector which could involve food companies, forestry companies, nature restoration charities working in that space. And all these people just advocating for what a new rural future could be. That's what I want people to kind of maybe get excited about.
No, very good. Ray, thanks a million for joining me.
Dermot, you're a gentleman, and we will chat again soon. Slán.
Thanks for listening to my chat with Ray. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like or rate it wherever you listen, and please share with someone who might be interested. Bye for now.